it has been far too long since we've done an episode where we sampled the course offerings at Prager University. So before Matt comes on, we are going to correct that. And I think the place to start is with their thoughts about capitalism, socialism, and freedom.
Why is socialism so popular? Less than 10 years ago, you couldn't refer to socialism in a positive way and hope to have a career in American politics. Socialism was referred to as the S word. Now it is affirmed either explicitly or implicitly by just about everyone on the left. And amazingly, given socialism's record of failure, the socialists seem to be gaining ground. Why? What makes socialism so attractive to so many? Socialism, according to its proponents, is more democratic and therefore more moral than capitalism. Leftist filmmaker Michael Moore explains it for us. Democratic socialism means everyone has a seat at the table and everybody gets a slice of the pie. The famed socialist writer Irving Howe wrote something similar in his 1982 autobiography. We believe that the democracy in our political life should also be extended deeply into economic life. The basic idea here is that socialism is vindicated through its roots in popular consent. If a majority of people working through their elected representatives declare something to be a public entitlement, say free college or free health care, then they are justified in extracting resources from those who create wealth to pay for it. As Nathan Robinson argues in his book, Why You Should Be a Socialist, the moral imperative is to place the economy under the control of the people. Sounds good, at least superficially, until you dig a bit below the surface. First, what direct control do the people really have over any government institution? What control do the British people have over the National Health Service? What control do Americans have over the Department of Motor Vehicles or the U.S. Post Office? The answer, of course, is none. Given its practical impossibility, genuine popular control over government institutions is a mirage. Second, what if 51% of Americans vote to confiscate the resources of a single person, say Bill Gates? Does that make it right?
Okay. He asked a question. This is a university, Prager University. So I'm going to give the class a... Jake, I think you have an answer?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Andy?
That was my answer. He took it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, as far as sounds good to me. I don't know. I mean, I think that would be right. I'm actually not sure why, Bill Gates, is entitled to more income than people who spend all day, every day doing hard manual labor would get over the course of many, many lifetimes. But presumably he's going to have some amazing argument that Bill Gates deserves all that money and it would be wrong to take it from him soon. We haven't finished the video yet, but right now I do just want to note that so far, after giving a description of socialism that I have to say makes it sound pretty cool to me, like everything he said about, socialists say X, Y, and Z. I'm like, man, socialists sound like they're making some good points. I don't know. That sounds good to me. But Irving Howe, Nathan Robinson, I mean, I've got a whole little reading list from this. This all sounds great. But so far, the only anti-socialist argument that I've heard, other than that it would be bad for some reason if Bill Gates didn't have all that money, is, which, by the way, I think you can tell this is, Dinesh is a little behind the times. I think Bill Gates wouldn't be the example that a lot of these guys would choose now. But other than that, the only sort of anti-socialist argument I heard so far is that apparently democracy is impossible just in general. I mean, if that's not what he was saying, that I didn't really understand what he was saying. I mean, he said people don't have direct control over the post office and the rest of it, which is true. They don't. Many socialists would like, postal workers, for example, to have much more control over what happens at the post office, have some level of workplace democracy at the post office and everywhere else. But also, I don't know. I mean, I think that the fact that it's funded, the U.S. Postal Service. Well, actually, it's self-funding, but the fact that it's a government-created institution, his policies, or come down from the public sphere, does have something to do with the fact that it's the only institution that will take a letter to from like Los Angeles to rural Alaska for 60 cents, and that none of the non-government mail carriers are likely to offer that phrase. It's 60 cents now, by the way, because there was there was, to be fair, a price raise. It used to, not that long ago, it was 55 cents. But, I don't really, I think that has something to do with the public's preferences. I don't know. I mean, naively, but like also the argument that he's giving here, like, and, also same thing for the NHS, right? That like, what control the, the British public has over the NHS, that they get to see to it that the NHS continues to exist. Since if people didn't have to worry about elections, it absolutely would have been privatized a long time ago, completely, and not just, by little, bits and pieces cutting around the edges. But also abstracted away from these examples, it seems like, okay, so it really sounds like Dinesh is saying that democracy in general is impossible. Because if he's saying that, government institutions that, that people have no control over them, then that doesn't just sound like an argument against economic democracy. That just sounds like an argument against democracy.
I do have to say, Professor Burgis, you're unlike any of the other professors I've had so far at Prager University. This is very interesting. I haven't been exposed to these points of view. I assume that.
I'm sure they believe in ideological diversity at Prager University.
But I'm sure, in the second half of the video, Professor Dinesh will be able to explain why the people have more control over large institutions, like Walmart, right? Like, how much control do we have over like these multi-national corporations? I'm sure somehow we have more direct control over.
We have much more control over what happens at Walmart than the post office, I'm sure, and we will get that explanation.
Yeah, that would convince me that maybe you're wrong and that Dinesh is right, if he's able to show that.
Well, let's see.
Under an authoritarian socialist government, a single dictator seizes the fruits of your labor. Everyone is against that. Under democratic socialism, a majority does. The end result is the same. You've been robbed. The fundamental problem with democratic socialism, however, is its assumption that in a free market system, the economy is not under the control of the people. This is exactly the opposite of how things work. Let me explain. Each of us are not only citizens, we are also consumers. These are overlapping categories. Every citizen is a consumer, and every consumer is also a citizen. The consumer, like the citizen, is a voter. As citizens, we vote once every 2 or 4 years. As consumers, we vote many times a day. The citizen votes with a ballot, which costs him nothing except the inconvenience of going to the polls. The consumer votes with his money, which costs him a lot, all the time and effort he put in to earn that money. Only a fraction of citizens are eligible to vote at the ballot box, but every consumer votes in the marketplace, even felons, even children. Illegal aliens cannot vote for political candidates, but they too vote with their money. Moreover, citizens participate in a system of representative democracy. Their views are filtered through the politicians who represent them. Consumers, by contrast, vote in a system of direct democracy. If you prefer an Audi to a Lexus or the Apple iPhone to the Samsung Galaxy, you don't have to elect some other guy to exercise these preferences. You do it directly yourself by paying for them. Here we see the secret of how those billionaires like Jeff Bezos got so rich. We made them rich. The inequality that socialists complain about is the result of popular mandate. Want fewer billionaires? Stop buying their stuff. Free markets work not through greed or exploitation, but by satisfying our wants. And the most successful entrepreneurs are those who anticipate our wants even before we have them. No one wrote Steve Jobs asking him to make a phone that took pictures, allowed people to text messages, and listen to music. He conceived it and built it before we knew we couldn't live without it. Market economies involve a level of popular participation and democratic consent that politics can only envy. We don't need to extend democracy from the political to the economic sphere. We already have it. And the moral grounding of free markets, just like that of our political system, is in the will of the people. In the latter case, a will expressed only on election day. In the former case, a will expressed deliberately, emphatically, constantly. We don't need socialism because we already have something more moral and more democratic. It's called capitalism. I'm Dinesh D'Souza for Prager University.
Yeah.
I don't think he stuck the landing.
No.
It started off so good.
Yeah, no, again, he was, there was like this nice, succinct, appealing presentation of some of what Nathan and Irvin Howe had to say about, the economy. It was a really good presentation about socialism, and then it kind of went off the rails in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, the only example he gives is the iPhone and the Samsung, and my understanding is the same company makes the screens for both companies, and the iPhones use a Samsung RAM chip. I'm not like an expert on these machine parts or anything like that, but that sounds like there's really not that much of a difference between the two products. Like, even by who makes it, it's just like the label on the side of the box.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm reminded of the Nick Hornby book, High Fidelity. There's a line where the guy who John Cusack plays in the movie, his girlfriend tells him at one point, he's obsessed about the difference between bands. And she's like, yeah, it's the difference between McDonald's and Burger King. I mean, there must be one, but who cares? And then the line in the book is, this probably wasn't the right time to tell her that I had complicated, informed views on that. But yeah, okay, first of all, notice that the argument that he gave against taking away Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates' wealth, was the first example in order to, give everybody health care and, education and, various other frivolous things that socialists, who, with our, with our unserious love of fifth graders, think that everybody should have. His only argument against that was that it was stealing. Right? He says, well, because under a socialist dictatorship, the dictator takes it away. Under a socialist democracy, everybody votes to take it away, but it's still stealing. But I mean, stealing in what sense, right? Liz, this is, this is always the problem. I mean, this is the Matt Brunick point about the, who, by the way, is going to be on the show in a few weeks, but Matt Brunick point about the non-aggression principle that, like, okay, you clearly don't mean legally. Right. If you're saying, stealing is taking away something that people have a right to, you're clearly not talking about a legal right, because, if your property is being taxed away or nationalized away, then you do not have a legal right to it. There are laws that presumably have been passed, meaning you don't have a legal right to it. So you have to be talking about a moral right to it. But if you're talking about a moral right, you're saying it's stealing because you have a moral right to it. Well, I mean, at that point, you're just kind of saying it's wrong because it's wrong, right? I'd say you're arguing in a circle. You haven't told me why it's wrong. Like, yeah, you're right. If we assume that Bill Gates has a moral right to all those billions of dollars and all the resources those represent, all the influence on society that represents, that that he has a moral right to have that, then sure, it would be wrong to take it away. But that's the thing we're arguing about, is whether he has a moral right to it. And you haven't given me a reason yet. You haven't given me your theory of who has a right to what. And, I mean, there are like theories that libertarians give of this, that that you have a right to it if you can trace your claim on it back to some morally, upright, original act of acquisition. Although, notably the economic history of the real world doesn't feature a lot of those. And, if we had like Rob Larson on, who's been a guest many times before, he wrote a book called Bit Tyrants about Silicon Valley. He could tell you all about Bill Gates's business practices in that example, and never mind just the sort of general roots of the current distribution of wealth and, various horrible things that happened earlier in our collective history. But also B, why should I believe that theory, right? I mean, why should I think that all that matters is what you can trace it back to? It doesn't matter, whether like people like diabetics will be dying who can't whose GoFundMe's don't raise enough money for their insulin because, it's because Bill Gates is going to have that money instead. I mean, like that's not obvious at the very least. And then in the second half that, it's not obvious that you shouldn't, that all of that stuff about the diabetics and all that doesn't factor into who has a moral right to what, that the only thing that matters is that you can trace it back to, through transactions that honor the rules of the free market to just active original acquisition. I mean, that's a hugely controversial assumption. And, I've got to say if I'm doing like a classroom observation here for Dinesh's tenure file, I don't think he's made his case. But then he's transitions from that into all of this stuff about how no, we actually are voting. We're voting with our dollars, right? This is the Milton Friedman argument. And one, as was pointed out in the chat, if we're all voting with our dollars, some of us have a hell of a lot more votes than others of us do, which is pretty relevant if we're evaluating, as Dinesh says at the end, which one of these things is more moral and more democratic. But two, notice which kinds of things we get to vote on with our dollars and which kinds of things we don't. Right? Like, okay, Andy doesn't care about the difference between the Samsung Galaxy and the iPhone, but I guess if you do care, right, you can vote about, how many are going to be produced by contributed to consumer demand. You can, and certainly like which consumer goods are produced is one important question. And in market economies, which by the way, don't have to be capitalist. The markets existed before capitalism. You could have markets in other kinds of systems, but in market economies, consumer spending does, it's wildly inegalitarian form of voting. But if you want to say that that's voting, like, I guess, right. But notice all the stuff that we don't get to vote on, right? Like his example was about Steve Jobs, right? It's like, oh, you voted to make Steve Jobs rich. Well, actually, I don't think I did, right? Like, I don't remember voting on that. And again, I mean, like the kinds of goods that are being sold is one thing, right? That you can, that like, if the voting with your dollars analogy makes any sense at all, it makes sense for that, right? But, and sure, indirectly by doing so, you're either enriching the Steve Jobs or his competitor or whatever, right? But you don't get to, but one, you don't actually know anything about how income is distributed within Apple when you buy it, right? It's not like there's a little sticker on the iPhone telling you what the average wages are at that the factory and the Foxconn factory where the phones are produced, so you can decide how you feel about that. And even if you did, right, in practice, when you're just trying to get a phone, you have a limited amount of money, blah blah blah. That's just not going to be at the top of your priority list, right? Because that's realistically, that's just not a way that's like that the democratic will of the voters is going to happen, right? So, like ballot initiatives for $15 minimum wage tend to pass, but people who, somehow or another, right? It's not that people were only buying from companies that paid $15 an hour because A, they don't know, and B, you've got enough other things that, are going to be more on the top of your mind when you're making consumer decisions. But also, I think we do actually have some real world empirical evidence about how actual voting plays out with regards to stuff like how rich Steve Jobs would be. Because if you can look at Mondragon in Spain, the world's largest worker-owned company. Essentially, it's a federation of worker co-ops, which is an example I'm picking not because it's like perfect and they don't make weird compromises with the capitalist surroundings and all that stuff, but just because it's like relevant evidence that that the gap between the lowest paid line worker at Mondragon and the best compensated executive, who's by the way hired through a democratic process, is like, I think it caps out at like 10 to 1 or 15 to 1. By contrast, in Spain as a whole, right, the CEO to worker pay gap is like 160 to 1, I think, which is only, of course, about half of what it is in this country. Because it turns out that if you're if people, a larger category of stakeholders actually get to vote on what the pay scales are, doesn't mean it's going to be 100% flat, right? Some people might still get paid more than others if everybody gets to vote on pay scales, because you can convince people, like some people, we need to be able to offer them more money, so they'll want to take this job for all sorts of reasons, either because it's really skilled, and so it's just not going to be worth it to people to acquire those skills if they're not going to be paid much, or their competitors will be able to pay them more, or this involves a lot of stress and responsibility, for some of those upper tier, managerial posts, or conversely, it's really dirty and dangerous. Nobody wants to do it. All of those things could drive up wages for some jobs relative to others within a cooperative firm, but you're not really going to be able to convince people, hey, guys, it's really important that you vote for me to have 500 times more than any of you have, because I've always wanted my own spaceship, and I don't think I'm going to be able to afford the spaceship payments if I'm not making 500 times more than the rest of you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be really curious to hear from someone who's really convinced by the argument that they feel like they have a meaningful say in what happens to society by what you fucking buy, unless you're rich enough to actually do so. It's just not something that to me even passes any kind of psychological muster, to feel like, I understand the first part, which is like probably largely because of the amount of money that goes into the system, you don't feel like you have control over what the government does, right? So he's tapping into that feeling. So I kind of understand that psychologically. But then the second part was just hilarious to me, that like what I buy has any control over what happens to society. I'm curious if that really soaks up anyone but like the most diehard freedmen and acolytes. You know what I mean? Who really feels like that if you make, let's say, under anywhere near the median or average income? You know what I'm saying? Like, who really feels like they have control over what happens to society? It's just such a ridiculous idea.
I mean, you can have a certain amount of influence. You can contribute to the collective influence on what. I don't know whether they're going to bring back the Mexican pizza at Taco Bell, but
actually less than I want on that. I'm trying to like. They only bring it back for limited amounts of time. Sorry, tangent.
Yeah, fair enough.
They're always out. Anyway,
even there, right? The system is failing. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.